You are listening to a Freedom Student Ministry podcast.
I'm going to tell you the story, and then I'm going to have you tell it to your neighbor the best you can. So pay attention to see if you can catch some of those details. Also, remember that Scripture's purpose, the purpose of the Bible, is to reveal God's character to us. So look for God's character as we read or as I tell you this story. And an interesting thing about the book of Ruth is the narrator, whoever wrote the story, doesn't actually mention God. The characters do, but the narrator never mentions God. And like we talked about in Esther, that doesn't mean that God isn't present. I mean, he's actually very present. So when you're listening to me tell the story, just try to listen for the ways that God is actually present in this story. So you have a couple jobs, listening jobs, while I'm telling you the story. You're listening for those details that you can tell your friend, the person sitting next to you, once I'm done telling the story. And you're listening for the ways that God shows up, even though his name is not actually mentioned all the time. Okay? But before we do that, I'm going to ask Mark to pray for just our hearts to be open and things like that. So,
God, we just welcome your presence in this room tonight, God. We just ask that you just make our hearts open and our minds open, God. It's just to your love and to your message, God, that you're going to speak through Ericka. God, thank you for giving us this opportunity to hear about you and what you've done and what you're doing in our lives. Amen.
Amen. Thanks, Mark. Okay, so our story begins in a place called Israel, and it was during a famine. And there was this family, a guy named Elimelech. Say that.
Elimelech.
Jeremiah's like, going, what kind of name is that? Elimelech, and his wife Naomi, which is a little bit easier to say. Naomi, right? And they moved to a place called Moab. And while they were there, they had 2 sons. That's an important part of the story. While they were there, Elimelech died. We don't know why, but he died. Yeah. So Naomi has her 2 sons, and they get married. They each marry Moabite women, so women from the place where they moved. And they are married for 10 years each. They each have no children, though. And after 10 years, both of the husbands die. It's insane. We don't know why, but they do. So that leaves Naomi with her 2 daughters-in-law who live with her. After maybe a little bit of a period of mourning, but we don't know exactly how long, Naomi kind of gathers her things, and she has the ladies gather their things, and they travel back to Bethlehem, where Naomi originally came from. And while they're traveling back to Bethlehem, Naomi stops and she looks at the 2 gals, one whose name is Ruth, as we're learning about tonight, the other one whose name is Orpah, not to be confused with Oprah, but Orpah. You can call her that if that helps you remember it. Orpah. She turns to those 2 gals and she's like, you ladies need to go back to where your family is. There's no life for you with me. I'm not going to get married and have 2 boys, and there's no way you're going to wait long enough to marry those 2 boys when they're old enough. This is not going to work out. There's no future for you in Bethlehem. So go back to your homes. Be with your families. And they both the girls just sobbed because they loved their mother-in-law, and it was kind of their security, their comfort to be with her. And Orpah says, okay, even though I'm sad, I will go back. And she goes back to her family. But Ruth says, no, I'm going to stay with you. And I love in the Bible, it even says that Ruth clinged to Naomi. She wanted to stay with her. And she even said these words that are kind of famous in the book of Ruth, I suppose. Kind of like, where you go, I'm going to go. Where you live, I'll live. And your God will be my God. That's what Ruth says to Naomi. And Naomi realizes that there's no way she's going to get rid of Ruth, so she kind of concedes and lets Ruth come with her. At that moment, though, Ruth is making a commitment to Naomi and a commitment to God, because she says, Naomi, your God is going to be my God. Ruth and Orpah come from families who believe in many gods. So at this point, Ruth is saying, I will believe in your God, which is the God we know, the one true God. So she traveled back with Naomi to Bethlehem, and the whole community saw Naomi and was like, oh my goodness, is this Naomi? Like, she's back? They couldn't believe it, and they didn't recognize her fully because she'd been gone for quite a while. And when she heard them call her Naomi, she's like, no, don't call me that. Call me Mara, which means bitter, because God has dealt bitterly with me. She was just in a place of mourning. She'd lost her husband and 2 of her sons, and now she's basically lost her daughter-in-law, Orpah. And so she said, call me bitter. And she said, yes. And so she was back, and Ruth was back with her. But Ruth, pay attention to this, was a foreigner in that land. Okay, so she wasn't from that land. She was a foreigner. And when they arrived, they were actually there at the beginning of the barley harvest, which is an important part of the story. Just so happened that Naomi had a relative who was actually her husband's relative, who worked in Bethlehem, who had fields where you could harvest wheat and barley. Just so happened that that was the case. And he was pretty rich as well. He was very wealthy. So one day, Ruth said to Naomi, she's like, I need to go out and find work. So I'm going to go glean in the fields. Do you know what glean means? No? Gleaning means she's going to go after the harvesters have already passed through the rows of wheat, and she's going to pick up all the pieces that they left behind, because she's going to hopefully take them back and sell them to make money. So she went out. Naomi said, go. So she got there, and she worked hard, and she ended up being in the very same field that Boaz owned. And Boaz comes back, and he greets his workers, and he says to his workers, wait a minute, who's that gal over there? You know, I don't recognize her. And the guys are like, well, that's Naomi's daughter-in-law. She came back from Moab. She's from Moab, and she came back with Naomi to live here. And she's been working hard. Since the early morning, she's hardly taken a break. She's been gleaning after us in the fields. And so he calls her over. Boaz does. Did I tell you that that's the name of Naomi's? Okay, I couldn't remember if I said that. So Boaz calls Ruth over, and he says, well, you're welcome here. Stay close to the women that are gleaning in the fields. Stay with them, and you're welcome to gather from them, or with them. And then you're also welcome to drink the water that my servants have gotten in the buckets. Also, don't worry, because I've told my servants not to harass you, which is amazing. So Boaz says that to her, and she just falls on her knee, and she's like, oh my goodness, why are you treating me so kindly? I'm a foreigner. I'm not from this land, and I've just come to work in your fields. Without any permission. I've just done this. And he said, I've heard about you. I heard that you treated Naomi so wonderfully after her husband died. And then you traveled with her, you're loyal to her, and you stayed with her rather than going to your family. And I just think that's amazing. That's basically what Boaz said to her. And again, she was just like, I can't believe how kind you're being to me. This is amazing. She just felt the kindness and the grace from him. So when she got back to work, he told the workers to give her the best. So she wasn't getting just what was left over anymore. She was getting the best wheat. And he even told the workers to pull the wheat out for her and give it to her rather than her having to go along and pick it up. He said, treat her so well. That's what he said to his workers. Give her special treatment. And so she just had an amazing time. Then she got to eat lunch at his table and eat as much as she could and then have leftovers. When she went home that day, she had 30 pounds or so of wheat, which is a lot. And she was probably going to be able to make a lot of money selling that. So she gets home, and Naomi's like, well, whose field were you working in today? And she goes, well, I was working in a man named Boaz's field. And Naomi goes, what? He's our relative. And then she goes, you know what? He's our kinsman redeemer. And I'm going to explain that word to you. Those words, it's a cultural thing, cultural practice. If the man in the family, Elimelech, died and left behind his wife and children. It was the kinsman means like relative, redeemer's duty to marry the widow, buy the land, and protect the family line. And Boaz was related to the family in such a way where he could do that. So Naomi's like super stoked. She's like, this is amazing. You met this guy. This could be our answer to a fresh start in life and our family line to get to be able to go on. So after the harvest was over, Naomi's like, you know what, Ruth? It's time for me to help you settle down, to find someone to marry, and to get you in another home so you're not having to live with me anymore. And she goes, I have an idea. Boaz will be at the threshing floor tonight, and that's where they got the wheat prepared to be grained so that they could sell it. He's going to be there tonight, and he'll sleep there tonight too. And I want you to go there tonight, and I want you to sleep at his feet. And which sounds weird to us, and I honestly don't know exactly why. Maybe next week we'll learn a little bit more about why. But he wakes up at midnight, or in the middle of the night, and he goes, who is that? And he says to her, who are you? Now, he didn't recognize her because before this, she was wearing clothes of mourning so that everybody could see that she was mourning the loss of her husband. She was a widow now. But now she had taken a bath, she was wearing perfume, and she was just dressed in kind of normal clothes for a young woman. And he was like, who are you? She says, well, I'm Ruth. She says, you're actually my kinsman redeemer. She said, you could marry me and buy our land and protect us. And he goes, you're right. And he was amazed at her because she was willing to be married to him in order to protect Naomi's family line, which is amazing. But he said, you know what? There's actually another man who's closer in relation to you than even I am. So in the morning, I'm going to have to go talk to him to see if he would want to marry you and to take your land. So he goes to him in the morning, and he sees it. Well, he goes to the town center, and he sees this guy pass by, and he's like, "Hey, come on over here. We got to chat about something." And he says, "So Naomi's back, and her daughter-in-law is here, and they need a kinsman redeemer, and you're in line before I am. So you would inherit. You would get this land. You would get property, things like that." And the guy's like, "Well, yeah, I'll do it." And then Boaz says, "Well, you'd also have to marry her daughter-in-law, Ruth." And when he hears that, he says, well, I would lose my inheritance, so I can't do that. And we don't know why he would lose his inheritance, whether he's already married or whatever reason. But he says there, no, I can't do it. So then Boaz says, well, okay, I can marry Ruth now. And so he does. And they end up having a baby that I'm going to tell you a little bit about in a second, because he has quite a significance in this story. But right now, do you think you're able to tell the story? So I'd like to tell you a little bit more about the story, okay? So go ahead and bear with me for the next few minutes, and we're going to go through this. It's actually a really great story because it has some neat things it can show us, especially as teenagers and as close to a teenager. Well, you know what I mean. I used to be a teenager. Sometimes I still live there. But the book of Ruth has has a purpose in showing us that God has a greater purpose for us than we're living right now. Even if you are loving Jesus and you're pursuing him and things are going so well with him, there's more. There's greater things. There's more excitement in him. So I just want you to believe that with me tonight, that there's more for you no matter where you are right now. Hey, Pates. The amazing thing about God is that once we actually, for real, take that step into relationship with him, we don't have to worry, as Wendy told me earlier, about missing the mark. We don't have to do things perfectly in order for God to arrange our story in a way that brings excitement and amazement at God. We don't have to be perfect. Does that make sense to you guys? Once we step into relationship with him, God moves pieces in our lives to glorify him, to honor him, and to just cause us to have greater, deeper love And literally, you guys, there's an excitement to living with Jesus. And I've been experiencing that actually for real the past like week and a half. But God has been like changing me and growing me, and it's been actually super, super amazing. If you're sitting around at home or if you're at school and you're asking questions like this where, like, why does my life suck? Maybe you've asked that question. Like, why does this junk keep happening to me? What is my purpose in life? Why am I even here on this planet? If you're sitting around asking any of those questions, like, I just want to tell you that once you connect to Jesus, you become connected to something that is so much greater than yourself. It's far greater than anything you could do yourself, and it's actually what you were literally created for. Stepping into relationship with Him and experiencing Him in a way that is deeper and greater than you could experience anything else. God's purpose for you, as it says in the book of Jeremiah, is not to harm you, but it's to give you a hope, give you a future in Him, which is greater than any future you could experience. So when you become a Christian, because I know some of you haven't actually made that step into relationship with Him, when you become a true follower of Jesus, the ordinary moments that you have in life, moments where you might think of as, oh, this is just normal, I'm going to the store with my mom, or I need to go to the library to pick up this book because I need it for this class, or, I'm getting ready for school again. Those ordinary moments can have an extraordinary purpose when you're following Jesus, because you're in a relationship with this one who loves you so deeply and so intimately. He knows everything about you, that you're just in this like glory cloud of like, oh my gosh, I'm with Jesus right now. It doesn't matter what I'm doing. So that's what I mean by He makes life even more exciting than we're experiencing right now. When you become a follower of Christ, your hope, say hope.
Oh.
Your hope is in Him. Your hope for a future is in Him. Your hope, your joy, your comfort is not in your situations or your relationships with your boyfriend or girlfriend or your relationships with your parents. Now, those things can be good, but that's not where your hope lies, and those things aren't strong enough to hold your hope. Only God is strong enough to hold your hope. So, in the story of Ruth, which is why I'm telling you all this, because it came from the book of Ruth, we hear about this young woman who says to her mother-in-law, "Your God will be my God." Remember that part of the story? And as soon as she says that, like I said earlier, she's making a commitment to Naomi and to God. And her commitment to God is that she's going to follow Him. So when she returns to Bethlehem with Naomi, and she lives with her there, she probably starts learning about this God that Naomi loves and believes in, and she probably starts learning how to follow this God and learning how to put her trust in Him. So she's probably started that process of following Jesus, or following God, like I'm telling you guys about. And as a result, this relationship with God, like God starts to create these happenstances, like these seeming coincidences in her life that redeem her situation, because before she was a widow who believed in many gods, not the one true God, and she was just in despair, wearing the clothes of a mourning person and just mourning the loss of her husband and her father-in-law and her brother-in-law. So these exciting happenstances, these things that happen in ordinary life, dramatically change and actually redeem Ruth and Naomi's situations. So let me explain. Naomi's husband, the breadwinner of the family, the one who brings home the bacon, provides for the family, passes away. Okay? Both her daughters-in-law don't have children, so there's no one to inherit any of the land or the money or any of the wealth. And then the sons pass away. So Naomi has no one who's going to take the family line and no one to take the inheritance. So she's in a pretty crappy position. Wouldn't you agree with me that she doesn't have a lot going for her? But then God sends Ruth to Naomi. Remember, Naomi believes in the one true God. And God sends, she's already there, but she was sent to Naomi to to help her. And God sees Ruth's loyalty to Naomi and Ruth's newfound dedication to himself, and he redeems their entire situation. He exchanges the yucky for good. And Ruth just happens to be in the same field that her kinsman redeemer owns. He happens to hear about her, see her loyalty to her mother-in-law, and says, yes, I will marry you, and I will buy the land. I will take on this inheritance and make sure the family line continues. And then he and Ruth have this baby. Now, this baby, just that comes from ordinary moments in Ruth's life, where Ruth goes to work, she meets a guy who happens to be a relative, and all these ordinary things that you and I experience too, just going to do our things, right? She meets a guy, they get married, they have a baby. His name is Obed. You guys gonna name your boy that someday? Obed. Yep. And he's actually the great-grandfather of a guy named David in the Bible, who actually is in the family line of Jesus. So because God redeemed this whole situation, Jesus comes from that family line. Isn't that intense? So just look at the loyalty of Ruth to Naomi and to God, and look how God changes his situation around. And it's not because Ruth or Naomi did anything right necessarily, or were really strict with their belief. It's because they just followed him, and they can look back in their life and they can see how God moved. Because in the moment they probably didn't know what God was doing, right? They couldn't see all the pieces that he was moving around. But he redeemed their situation. Ruth's ordinary became extraordinary, right? And by that I mean she and Naomi were just living their lives following God, and God started moving in their lives and creating something amazing out of it. And then for us, as people who live nowadays, we have Holy Spirit who can live inside of us if we say yes to Jesus, and just create like a new world of hope and joy and peace that we'll never get to experience without him. And he came from their family line, which is really intense. But I just want to encourage you tonight, during worship time, if you've never said, okay, I would like to start for real a relationship with Jesus, like tonight's the night for you to do that. And if you are in a place where you've already said yes to Jesus and you just want more, you can ask for prayer for more, but you can also just ask the Lord yourself. Just say, God, I want more. And he may show up in a way that you don't expect, but he'll show up if you just keep pressing in and saying, God, I want more. I want to follow you, and I want the excitement and the extraordinary life of Jesus to enter, or to just move deeper in me. You can ask that tonight.
You are listening to a Freedom Student Ministry podcast.